Okay, y'all. Part two. Now, I want to start part two starting with an analogy. All right. Let's think about newborn babies. When the baby's first born, they have they have no knowledge. So based on that analogy of the human eye I gave you, where people actually see from the inside of their brain outward, what do babies actually see? They don't identify with nothing because they haven't been indoctrinated into knowledge. They can't quantify and what they see because they don't know how to define what they see. So if you think about a newborn baby who's just entered into the world, everything that baby knows was probably what it instinctively felt from within its mother. So kind of like that is how what the world does to the human, to man, you know. And I'm just trying to break people down to understand that either way you're taking faith. Either way, you know, people want to discredit the Bible because, you know, the Bible just identifies the corruption of man. You know, the Bible holds a law, which is a mirror up to the ways of man, and in that mirror, we see how we fall short. We see how instinctively you don't have to teach children to lie, to be sneaky, to be selfish. You don't have to teach these things. When we're born innately just caring about ourselves. Even as children, give a child something, snatch it away, they will cry because they just want what they want, whether it's good for them or not. And it's out of that nature that we see the original sin manifest. Excuse me. Because we're not born fully submitted to the will of our Creator, understanding that His ways are the only righteous ways for our benefit. Now, people understand, it's funny because people want to talk about, well, the Bible is oppressive and the Bible holds people back. Honestly, if the principles of the Bible were applied in business, there would be more honest business and more productivity, more personal responsibility, and more honest trade. Now, if the Bible was applied in relationships, there would be more fidelity. Sorry, my lips dry. There would be more fidelity. There would be more treating others like you would like to be treated. There'd be more thinking of the other while the other thinks of the other. Think about this. Two selfish people in a relationship means that no one is thinking about nobody. But when everybody in the relationship is selfless, you don't have to worry about being cared about because we got each other covered. So I don't have to think about myself, and she doesn't have to think about it herself in that scenario. Now, these are people who are fully submitted to the will of God. Build yourself, identify yourself, so that you are assured and built on a foundation for where you define yourself through the principles that you know to be righteous and to be moral and to be upbuilding for you as a man or a woman. And then you can go into a relationship with confidence, not needing anything from the other, but being willing, full of love to give, being full of, for a man, structure, wisdom, strength to offer, spiritual endurance in tough situations. See, these are the things that can be evenly exchanged. A woman can offer a nurturing spirit, her helpmeet type qualities, her support in whatever way she can support that man in his program. However that works. But there will always be respect. But without God, there's just usury and manipulation. There's lying and deceiving. Just to get something from the other without actually wanting the other. And we have to realize that you can't steal from God without giving God the credit. Because if you don't bring up the fact there is a God, excuse me, my sinuses always get messed up, then you can't attribute the characteristics and benefits that come with a moral standard of how we like to be treated. So the Bible appeals to our um, immaterial moral standards and the laws of logic and reason that don't need to be interpreted. You know, logic doesn't need to be interpreted because I know if I drop something, it's going to fall because of density. Now, science wants to call gravity, and I'm going to be real with y'all. Do the research. Science doesn't know how to identify gravity. They just identify the effects that they call gravity. But actually what they have is density. Because gravity is supposed to be some universal force that nothing can escape within because of the mass of the earth pulling everything down, according to science. Now, if that's the case, why does smoke rise? Well, people will say, well, smoke is lighter. Yeah, but gravity, it should be all powerful to keep everything going downward regardless to its weight. You know, you mean to tell me a whole ocean full of water is really molecules, each droplet of water together creates the whole, but you don't see individual droplets rising up because they're light? No, gravity is supposed to be universally standard, but it's really just density. Things have more density than the other. You know, things are lighter than air. Things are heavier than air. Same with water. It's called buoyancy. Something that's more buoyant will float. Something less buoyant will sink. This is not the effects of gravity. And you know, I used to be indoctrinated like many people until I started to see things for myself. For example, during the solar eclipse, I've noticed that they say a solar eclipse is when the moon passes in front of the sun and the earth, right? But guess what I've never seen? I've never seen the moon approach, and I've never seen the moon depart. So all we see is a shadow. How? Everybody has seen the moon and the sun out on a sunny day, right? Also, there were instances where I've seen both the sun and the moon, where I've seen clouds in front and behind the sun. I actually have footage on a video camera I recorded with my cell phone and sent to people. I've seen clouds in front and behind the moon. So how is the moon the distance that they say it is? Doesn't make sense. I mean, there's so many holes, and we don't want to address the fact that this could all be an agenda to hide God. Because when you take away the value, the intrinsic value that we all can identify our worth by, we can reduce ourselves to animal and basically chemicals just reacting by impulse that need to be governed and controlled to be made merchandise and to be turned into commerce for a government to basically manipulate us into our own demise. You know, I mean, that's how you justify all this politics and all this needing to govern and all. Let me tell you something. People know right and wrong. It's just that there are immoral people. There's evil people who don't want to adhere to order. You know? And it's not because they're animalistic. It's because they have to reject the very view that they want to be reflected to them. The very treatment that they want to be given to them. They have to reject that. Because everybody knows that when you cheat, it's wrong because nobody wants to be cheated. Just like everybody knows that lying is wrong because nobody wants to be lied to. See, there's a reflection within that you don't have to interpret, but is written on your mind. And I'm going to get to the mind because the mind actually proves God objective empirically more than anything. So, I said, back to what I said, the Bible appeals to the immaterial moral standard and laws of logic and reason that don't need to be interpreted, but are uniformly agreed upon because we all desire to be treated based on how we all know to be right from within, reflected from our complaining and drawing expectation to objecting of another. See, when you complain, you draw a moral standard higher than both of you. And when you have an expectation to how you expect to be treated, you also draw a higher moral standard, because if it's just preference, one preference can't have more weight than the other. And with all preferences and opinions being equal, no one has a right to justify or complain. As much as a lion has a right, a gazelle has a right to be complaining about a lion eating it. It's just supposed to be nature without God, right? But nobody wants to accept that. See, justice is an immaterial law. Logic is an immaterial law. You know, these things will exist and be true whether a man is here to interpret it or not. You know, well, justice is a reflection of logic, but logic will exist whether like 1 + 1 = 2, whether someone's there to witness it or not. And see, let's get back to God and science. See, God prescribes behavior. This is by Frank Turek, by the way. Somebody you need to check out. And science describes behavior. So God gives a moral code, while science basically steals from God and describes what's already been there and uses those laws to work within without giving God credit. See, and also science requires a scientist to be a moral person for the data to be uncorrupted. Otherwise, what keeps someone from being corrupt and lying in an experiment to produce a specific desired result? And if that was the case, what science would we, if you want to apply science as your standard to how everything exists, which scientist is the most moral and what is the determining factor to that? You know, I mean, we have proof everywhere in these so-called scientific communities where people have falsified data and lied. And people want to sit there and slander the God of the Bible, when the God of the Bible is actually being presented true, because all of the sins and wicked things that we see are reflected in the Bible. And the Bible wants us not to yield ourselves to those desires. Because when we do yield ourselves to those very desires, we see the effects of a broken society and relationships that we all have to walk through and exist in every day. I mean, you just can't have an order, constructive society without God. That's like expecting a whole bunch of bacteria to not break down something. That's their job. And without human beings, without God, they're just as destructive. Because everybody's just thinking about themselves and manipulating the other to get some desired effect. There's no love, there's no honor, there's no intrinsic value of life. It's just, I'm just driven by a selfish, shallow desire for an immediate gratification. Immediate gratification. And honestly, science actually supports, I know this is going to mess people up, racism and all kinds of evil. See, survival of the fittest and doing what you have to do for your group, but that sounds like racism. If you give me a minute, because if we want to say that everybody should be allowed to do what they need to do to have a superior group, for their group to be the best fit to survive, well, that includes war and conquering. It just does. I mean, according to nature, if you're conquered, then you're the weaker one. So how can you inflict justice in a law of nature? Doesn't make sense. Now, to God, God is the one that tells us to love our neighbor as ourselves, to think of the others more than we think of ourselves. Now, don't get those scriptures twisted as weakness. That's once you've already been established in the truth, and once you already have built yourself, especially as a man, to be foundationally secure, that you can actually think of someone else, because you've already thought of yourself when you've aligned yourself with the intrinsic values of your Creator. So you have already secured yourselves that you can think of someone else without bringing a cost or a liability to your own well-being. Now, right, you can't apply a moral code to survive. People are going to do whatever they have to do to survive. And that includes enslaving another people. I mean, again, if that's a law of nature, if survival of the fittest, if you can enslave a people to do something for you, as much as we all would like to morally object, without God, there's no objection. That's just natural selection. You know, cheating, adultery, theft. These are people, you know, we got to be careful when we say the term loving ourselves, because remember, love is a selfless virtue of God. It's not a feeling, you know. So if you want to use it as a feeling, someone's loving themselves when they cheated on their spouse because what they did made them feel better in the moment. Although it had a probably much detrimental effect on the very institution to which they wanted to be in. But if it made them feel good, then they were thinking about themselves. And see, that's the issue. So does adultery and theft and lying. These are people who are doing things that they think are in their best interest in a moment. You know, they were thinking about themselves. See, you have no security have no security in loving yourself if God is not included as the source of love, which is instilled by His very attributes, characteristics, and virtues. You know, um, yeah. Those are tools that people, all those things I listed are tools that a person can use to thrive, albeit wicked tools, but only a person who defines God as a moral standard has a foundation to object to the harming of another to survive and thrive. You know, and people want to say, well, God issued people to kill people in the Bible. Look, this is God, okay? This is the one who is the standard of truth and righteousness, okay? God is the owner of life and the creator of life. And if anyone can take it and give a decree to do so, it is Him. But it is not for the selfish reasons. It's for the well-being of the whole. See, God doesn't want the world to be destroyed because we let evil fester. He would rather cut out the people who will not hear Him, who will not kneel and subject themselves to the will of the eternal God, the creator of all things. We're not talking about a person who just wants to buy a fancy car or a better house. We're talking about the creator of all things. If anybody has authority to take back what's theirs, it's Him. And keep in mind, the Old Testament Bible was written in a closed community where the very government was to obey God and avoid bringing His wrath and His judgment upon the people that turned away from Him. Okay? Where people outside that specific, I know they're Hebrew Israelites, but biblically, you know, they're the people who were not of the Hebrew people were called Gentiles. Now, let's see. All right. So now let's get to this. The brain, right? Well, science says the brain is the product of unintelligent processes that have no direction, that just brought the brain together. Now, why would you want to trust that? That's what your brain is from a scientific process. I repeat, it's a product of unintelligent processes that have no direction, that just brought your brain together with chemical reactions. All right? See, scientists actually have to rely on a mind that comes from the mind of a creator, because it's that mind that adheres to the laws of logic and reason that allow people to have a uniform standard of saying that this is what something is always, to build off of that. Standards and measurements come from things that are immovable and fixed. You know? And I think Charles Darwin said something about, can you trust a monkey mind? And this was his doubt, and I'll read it. It says, with me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of a man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of a lower animal, are of any value at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind, if there are any convictions in such a mind? Now, this is Charles Darwin, folks. This is the people that y'all want to sit there and say, well, how there is no God. Make that make sense. Like I said, people overlook the most common objective for God revealed by the Bible is our own existence, our mind, and our spirit, made in the image of our Creator. Your very thoughts, the way your very mind, not your physical mind, but the mind, your consciousness that animates that shuttles your soul through your brain, is what actually gives you the immaterial attributes that are made from the image of God, that you can actually declare and have an objective moral standard where you can determine right and wrong. You know, animals do what they need to do by impulse and instinct. All right? And the impulse and instinct, you can't sit there and say that doing a specific behavior is wrong. You can only say that when there's a God who holds everyone to a higher standard based on His will. And let me give you a scripture. And this might hurt the unbelieving folks, but I'll do it anyway. It says, this is Romans 1:20. Romans 1:20 says, for the invisible things of Him, from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so they are without excuse. See, the invisible things of him, of God, from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. We can use what God has created and to reveal his greatness and his power in our lives. We can also use the experiences of an imperfect people, in an imperfect world, to reveal a perfect God. Because all it does is reveal our need for a creator with a higher moral standard to extract what we need to extract from our experiences to draw ourselves back to him. Because we have the free will to disobey him and to reject him. But that doesn't work out in the end. But God uses these harshness, these fires that we can be refined in, to bring us back into his good graces, and by accepting the work that he has done for us. This is a free gift, folks. This is not telling you to walk up a mountain and shout 100,000 Hail Marys and look at the sun and do a backflip, okay? This is just accepting that your nature is falling short of the standard of your creator. And because of that, he's created a lineage to which he can live within the flesh that you cannot defeat, and the death that comes with that sin in that flesh. And he can live that perfect life. He can gain the reward of that perfect life and extend his righteousness to his undeserved creation, while taking the punishment that we all deserve for not meeting the standard, using our free will for evil against him, and be made clean and holy to be seen as he is on that day of judgment, by just accepting that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, and whosoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. Now, if you hate that the Bible says that your very creator, who loved you so much that he would take the punishment to fulfill his own justice, in which we all can see we fall short with by our own wickedness and our only need for forgiveness among each other, not even talking about him. If you can reject that and you think that that's wicked, that your creator will solve the problem that no other religion can solve freely, and just wants you to see an act of love so that you can willingly want to choose him, the only protection in an evil world, to live with him, to come into your full nature, which is an eternal being, to be in pure love, to actually know the true attributes of God, unfeigned, undiluted with sin and wickedness, apart from this world, to actually be in the purity of his presence. You think that's a bad thing? Then I guess you just don't want him. And I guess good luck seeing what happens when you die. Wouldn't recommend it. I think if you really want something to hate and you don't believe in God, hate the fact that when you die you mean nothing. Hate that. That's something to hate. Don't hate that the Bible says that your creator loved you so much that he extended his love against all the things that we do against him, because we have free will just to do so. All right. So with that being said, I'm only doing 2 parts with this because this gives me a headache. Peace out.